A Debt of Vengeance. New York, 1917. Helena Brooks discovered a tattered banner in the attic of an old building, its faded fabric emblazoned with the crest and named Captain Robert Douglas, echoing tales of bravery. Chapter 1. The Dust of Forgotten Summers. The attic air hung thick and still, a suffocating blanket woven from dust motes and the ghosts of forgotten summers. Helena Brooks coughed, pulling the edge of her cotton scarf higher over her nose, but the scent of aged wood and decaying paper clung stubbornly to the back of her throat. Sunlight, fractured and weak, slanted through a single grimy window, illuminating swirling particles that danced like tiny, frantic spirits. It was a space untouched by time, a repository of discarded memories in the heart of a bustling New York City. Helena had always loved attics. As a child, they were treasure troves, filled with the mysterious relics of her ancestors. Now, at 58, they offered a different kind of solace, a retreat from the relentless present, a place where the echoes of the past drowned out the clamor of a world rushing headlong into war. The Great War, they called it, though Helena found nothing great about the endless lists of casualties that filled the newspapers, the anxious faces of young men heading off to training camps, or the hollow-eyed women left behind. This particular attic belonged to the old Vanderlyn building, a once grand structure on the Lower East Side that was now slated for demolition. Helena, a volunteer with the New York Historical Society, had been tasked with documenting and salvaging any items of historical significance before the wrecking ball swung. Most of the building's contents had been cleared out, leaving behind only the detritus of generations' broken furniture, moth-eaten textiles, and boxes overflowing with yellowed papers. She moved deeper into the gloom, her sensible shoes scuffing against the wide planked floorboards. The air grew cooler, carrying a faint, almost imperceptible scent of the sea, a reminder of the harbor that lay just beyond the city's concrete canyons. Cobwebs, thick as shrouds, draped from the rafters, brushing against her face like spectral fingers. Helena shivered, though not entirely from the cold. There was a palpable sadness here, a weight of unspoken stories that pressed down on her. She paused beside a stack of battered trunks, their leather cracked and peeling, their brass clasps tarnished green with age. Most were empty, their contents long since dispersed or discarded. But one, tucked away in a shadowed corner, caught her eye. It was smaller than the others, made of dark, polished wood, and bound with iron straps. Unlike the others, it was still securely fastened. Curiosity, that persistent itch that had driven her since childhood, tugged at her. With a grunt of effort, Helena dragged the trunk into the pool of sunlight. The hinges creaked protestingly as she lifted the heavy lid. Inside, nestled amongst layers of tissue paper, was a folded piece of fabric. Carefully, almost reverently, she lifted it out. It was a banner, or what remained of one. Time and neglect had taken their toll. The once vibrant colors had faded to muted shades of ochre and rust. The edges were frayed and tattered, and several large holes marred the fabric. But even in its dilapidated state, there was a sense of grandeur about it, a hint of a proud and glorious past. As Helena spread the banner out on the dusty floor, the design became clearer. It was a regimental crest, intricately embroidered with gold thread that still shimmered faintly in the dim light. A lion rampant, claws outstretched, stood guard over a crossed sword and rifle. Beneath the crest, in elegant, looping script, was a name, Captain Robert Douglas. And below that, a regiment number that was only partially visible, Captain Robert Douglas. The name resonated with a faint, almost forgotten familiarity. Helena racked her brain, searching through the tangled threads of her memory. Had she heard the name before? Seen it in some old document or newspaper clipping? She carefully examined the banner, her fingers tracing the outline of the embroidered crest. The fabric felt strangely smooth beneath her fingertips, a testament to the quality of the craftsmanship. It was a relic of a different era, a time when war was still romanticized, before the horrors of the trenches had etched themselves onto the world's consciousness. A sudden draft stirred the air, causing the dust motes to swirl even more frantically. Helena looked up, startled. The attic window, which had been firmly closed, was now slightly ajar. A chill, sharper than before, swept through the room. She frowned, crossing to the window and pulling it shut. It was probably just the wind, she told herself. But a sense of unease lingered, a prickling sensation at the back of her neck. She returned to the banner, her gaze drawn back to the name embroidered in fading gold. Captain Robert Douglas. Who was he? What was his story? And why did his banner end up here, forgotten in a dusty attic in a building about to be torn down? A wave of weariness washed over Helena. She had been in the attic for hours, and the dust and gloom were beginning to take their toll. She should pack up the banner, label it, and move on to the next task. But something held her back. A sense of obligation, perhaps, to the unknown captain and the forgotten story his banner represented. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook and a pencil. She began to sketch the crest, carefully replicating the details of the lion, the crossed weapons, and the faded lettering. As she drew, she felt a connection to the past, a sense of shared humanity across the gulf of years. The light outside was beginning to fade, casting long, distorted shadows across the attic floor. Helena knew she should leave, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the verge of discovering something important, something that had been waiting for her in this forgotten space. A story that was more than just dust and echoes. A story about a captain, a banner, and a war that had shaped the world. And somehow, she knew it was a story that was about to change her life. It started now, with this almost physical pull to unravel the banner's past. Chapter 2. Echoes in the attic rafters. The pencil scratched against the paper, a small, insistent sound in the deepening silence of the attic. Helena meticulously copied the faded inscription, her brow furrowed in concentration. Captain Robert Douglas, 1/7th Regiment. The middle number was obscured by a tear in the fabric, rendering the full regimental designation illegible. Frustration pricked at her. It was like trying to assemble a jigsaw puzzle with a crucial piece missing. She leaned back, rubbing her tired eyes. The air had grown noticeably colder, and the shadows seemed to press in closer, as if the attic itself were holding its breath. Helena glanced at the window again. It was firmly shut, yet she could have sworn she heard a faint whisper, a rustling sound that seemed to come from the rafters above. Just the old building settling, she muttered to herself, trying to shake off the growing unease. She was a woman of logic and reason, not prone to fanciful imaginings. Yet, there was an undeniable atmosphere in the attic, a sense of something unseen, something waiting to be revealed. She returned her attention to the banner, running her fingers over the frayed edges. The fabric felt strangely warm, almost alive, beneath her touch. It was as if the banner itself were trying to communicate, to share its secrets with her. Helena decided to try a different approach. She carefully folded the banner, placing it back in the trunk with the tissue paper. Then, she began to search the attic more systematically, hoping to find something else: a letter, a diary, a photograph that might shed light on Captain Douglas and his regiment. She sifted through piles of old newspapers, their headlines screaming of long-forgotten battles and political scandals. She examined dusty books, their pages brittle and yellowed, their titles hinting at lives lived and lost. She peered into cracked porcelain dolls' heads, their glassy eyes staring blankly into the void. Hours passed, and the last vestiges of daylight faded from the attic window. Helena lit a small, battery-powered lantern she had brought with her, casting a flickering circle of light in the gloom. The shadows danced and swayed, taking on grotesque and menacing shapes. She was about to give up, convinced that she had exhausted every possible avenue of inquiry, when she noticed a small, wooden box tucked away in a far corner of the attic. It was almost completely hidden beneath a pile of discarded roof slates. With a surge of renewed hope, Helena dragged the box into the light. It was plain and unadorned, with no markings or inscriptions. The wood was dark and smooth, worn smooth by time and handling. She lifted the lid, her heart pounding with anticipation. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a collection of letters. They were tied together with a faded ribbon, their edges brittle and brown. The handwriting on the top envelope was elegant and flowing, unmistakably feminine. The address was simply, Captain Robert Douglas, 1/7th Regiment, somewhere in France. Helena's breath caught in her throat. Here it was. A connection. A tangible link to the man whose banner she had discovered. She carefully untied the ribbon and lifted the top letter from the stack. The paper was thin and fragile, almost translucent. She held it up to the lantern light, her hands trembling slightly. The date at the top of the page read, June 12th, 1915. The letter began, My dearest Robert. Helena hesitated, feeling a pang of guilt. She was intruding on a private correspondence, reading words that were never meant for her eyes. But the pull of the story, the desire to understand the life of Captain Douglas and the woman who wrote to him, was too strong to resist. She began to read. The words were filled with love and longing, with fear and uncertainty. The woman, whose name was Clara, wrote of her life in New York, of the anxieties of wartime, of her hopes and dreams for a future that seemed increasingly precarious. She wrote of missing Robert terribly, of counting the days until his return, of her unwavering faith in his courage and strength. As Helena read, she felt a profound sense of connection to Clara, a kinship that transcended the boundaries of time and space. She could almost hear Clara's voice, feel her emotions, share her anxieties. It was as if the letter had opened a window into another world, a world of wartime romance and sacrifice. She read through several more letters, each one revealing more about the relationship between Robert and Clara. They were deeply in love, their bond forged in the crucible of war. But there were also hints of trouble, of unspoken fears and anxieties. Clara alluded to rumors she had heard, to whispers of danger and betrayal. She begged Robert to be careful, to take no unnecessary risks. The last letter in the stack was dated November 5th, 1916. It was shorter than the others, the handwriting noticeably more frantic. Clara wrote of receiving a telegram from the War Department, informing her that Robert had been wounded in action. She was desperate for news, pleading with him to write to her, to let her know that he was alive. Helena's heart ached for Clara. She could only imagine the agony of waiting, the not knowing, the constant fear that gnawed at the soul. She reached for the next letter, hoping for a reassurance, a sign that Robert had survived. But there were no more letters. The box was empty. A wave of disappointment washed over Helena. The story was incomplete, the ending unresolved. What had happened to Robert Douglas? Had he recovered from his wounds? Had he ever returned to Clara? She sat there in the flickering lantern light, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, feeling a profound sense of loss. She had come to care about these people, to invest in their lives, their hopes, their dreams. And now, she was left with nothing but unanswered questions. Suddenly, a loud crash from downstairs echoed through the building. Helena jumped, her heart pounding in her chest. It sounded like something heavy had fallen, or perhaps been thrown. The building was supposed to be empty. No one should be there. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. She quickly gathered the letters, placing them back in the box. She had to get out of there. She had to get to safety. She blew out the lantern and stood, listening intently. The silence was deafening, broken only by the creaking of the old building and the pounding of her own heart. She took a tentative step towards the attic stairs, her hand reaching out to grip the dusty railing. Another sound. This time it was above, where the banner had been found. Chapter 3. The Captain's Crest and Colors. It was a soft, scraping sound, like fabric dragging across wood. Helena froze, every muscle tense, her ears straining to identify the source. The attic, plunged into near total darkness after she extinguished the lantern, felt suddenly vast and menacing. The shadows, no longer dancing, seemed to solidify, to become watchful, silent entities. She forced herself to breathe, to think rationally. It could be anything. A rat, perhaps, dislodged by the earlier crash downstairs. Or the wind, playing tricks with the loose slates on the roof. But the memory of the slightly ajar window, the earlier feeling of unease, refused to be dismissed. Helena fumbled in her satchel for the small flashlight she carried for emergencies. Her fingers, clumsy with fear, brushed against the smooth, cool surface of the wooden box containing Clara's letters. She hesitated. Should she leave it behind? It was evidence, a crucial piece of the puzzle. But it was also bulky, and she needed to be able to move quickly. Making a split-second decision, she tucked the box under her arm, the velvet lining surprisingly soft against her skin. She clicked on the flashlight, a narrow beam cutting through the darkness. She swept it slowly across the attic, her heart hammering against her ribs. The beam landed on the spot where she had found the banner. The trunk was still there, the lid slightly ajar, just as she had left it. But something was different. A corner of the faded fabric, a glint of gold thread, was visible, peeking out from beneath the lid. Helena's breath hitched. She hadn't put the banner back like that. She had carefully folded it and placed it in the center of the trunk, surrounded by tissue paper. Someone or something had moved it. Slowly, cautiously, she approached the trunk, the flashlight beam trembling in her hand. The scraping sound came again, louder this time, definitely coming from inside the trunk. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold, rough iron bands. She took a deep breath and lifted the lid. The banner was there, but it was no longer folded. It was partially unfurled, as if someone had been examining it. And as Helena watched, mesmerized and terrified, the banner seemed to move, to shift slightly in the dim light. A gasp escaped her lips. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a rat. There was something else in the trunk. She leaned closer, her flashlight beam focused on the center of the banner, on the faded crest of the rampant lion. And there, nestled amongst the folds of the fabric, was a small, dark object. Helena reached into the trunk, her fingers brushing against the object. It was cold and hard, metallic. She pulled it out, holding it up to the light. It was a bullet, a single, spent bullet, its casing tarnished and dented. A wave of dizziness washed over Helena. She staggered back, dropping the flashlight. It clattered to the floor, the beam extinguished, plunging the attic back into darkness. She stood there, trembling, the bullet clutched in her hand. The implications of her discovery were staggering. The bullet had been in the trunk, with the banner. It had to be connected to Captain Douglas, to his regiment, to the war. But how? Had the bullet been fired at him? Had it been the one that wounded him, the one that prompted the telegram Clara had received? Or did it have some other, more sinister significance? The questions swirled in her mind, unanswered and unsettling. She felt a growing sense of urgency, a need to understand the truth behind the bullet and the banner. She had stumbled upon something far more complex, far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The crash from downstairs came again, closer this time, followed by the distinct sound of footsteps. Someone was definitely in the building, and they were coming closer. Helena knew she had to get out. She had to escape before it was too late. She grabbed the flashlight, fumbling to turn it back on. The beam flickered to life, illuminating the attic stairs. She took a step, then another, her legs feeling heavy and unsteady. As she reached the top of the stairs, she glanced back at the trunk, at the partially unfurled banner. The bullet, still clutched in her hand, felt cold and heavy, a tangible symbol of the danger that surrounded her. She knew she couldn't leave the banner behind. It was too important, too connected to the mystery. She had to take it with her. With a surge of adrenaline, she turned back, grabbed the banner, and stuffed it into her satchel alongside the flashlight. The wooden box, containing Clara's letters, was still tucked securely under her arm. She turned and fled, down the stairs, into the darkness of the building, the echoes of the footsteps behind her growing louder with every step. The weight of the banner and the box, the weight of the past pressed down on her, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. She had to keep running, to keep searching, to uncover the truth that lay hidden within the faded colors of the captain's crest. It was all she could focus on as she was spurred onward. Chapter 4. Whispers of a Bygone War. The stairs creaked and groaned beneath Helena's weight, each step a betrayal in the unnerving silence of the old building. She descended quickly, but cautiously, her hand gripping the rough wooden railing, her flashlight beam darting ahead, illuminating peeling wallpaper and cobweb-draped doorways. The footsteps below had stopped, replaced by an unsettling quiet that was somehow more menacing. She reached the ground floor, her heart pounding in her chest. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay, mingled with a faint, acrid odor that she couldn't quite place. She swept the flashlight beam across the hallway, revealing a scene of utter desolation. Plaster had fallen from the ceiling, revealing the lath beneath. Furniture lay overturned, covered in a thick layer of grime. She had to get out, to reach the street, to find help. But which way? The building was a maze of corridors and rooms, and she had lost her bearings in the darkness. She hesitated, listening intently. The silence was broken only by the distant rumble of traffic and the frantic beating of her own heart. Then she heard it. A faint whisper, a murmur of voices, coming from somewhere nearby. She moved towards the sound, her footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust on the floor. The voices grew louder, clearer, but she still couldn't make out the words. They seemed to be coming from behind a closed door at the end of a hallway. Helena approached the door cautiously, her flashlight beam focused on the cracked and peeling paint. She could hear two distinct voices, one male, one female. They were speaking in hushed tones, their words urgent and intense. She pressed her ear against the door, straining to hear. "That cannot be sure. Too risky," the male voice said. "Must find it. Before they do," the female voice replied. "The banner. It holds the key," the male voice continued. Helena's blood ran cold. They were talking about the banner she had taken from the attic. The banner that held the secret of Captain Robert Douglas. Who were these people? And what did they want with the banner? She knew she shouldn't stay, that she should run, get away as fast as she could. But her curiosity, her sense of obligation to Captain Douglas and Clara, held her rooted to the spot. She had to know more. She had to understand what was going on. She took a deep breath and gently tried the doorknob. It turned silently. The door was unlocked. Slowly, carefully, she pushed the door open, just a crack, and peered inside. The room was dimly lit by a single gas lamp, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Two figures stood facing each other, their backs to the door. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark suit. The woman was smaller, slender, her face hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. They were so engrossed in their conversation that they didn't notice her. "Dat said it was hidden. With the letters." The man said. "But where'd the attic was searched?" The woman replied. "Dat must be something we missed. Something obvious." The man said, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Helena's heart skipped a beat. They were talking about the letters. Clara's letters. The letters she had in the wooden box, tucked under her arm. She realized, with a chilling certainty, that these people were not friends. They were dangerous. And they were looking for the same thing she was. She had to get out of there before they discovered her. She began to slowly, silently, pull the door shut. But as she did, her foot brushed against something on the floor. A small, metal object. It clattered against the wooden floorboards, the sound echoing loudly in the silence of the room. The two figures turned, startled. Their eyes met Helena's. The man's face hardened, his eyes narrowing. The woman gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Who are you?" the man demanded, his voice sharp and menacing. Helena froze, her mind racing. She couldn't run. They would catch her. She had to think, to act, to find a way out of this. Her gaze fell on the gas lamp on the table. It was the only source of light in the room. An idea, desperate and dangerous, formed in her mind. She took a deep breath and stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. I work for the Historical Society," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I was just checking the building." Before the demolition. The man didn't believe her. She could see it in his eyes. "What's in a box?" he demanded, his gaze fixed on the wooden box under her arm. Helena knew she couldn't lie. She had to buy herself some time. She held up the box. "Letters," she said. "Old letters. From the war." The man's eyes flickered with interest. He took a step toward her. "Let me see them," he said. Helena knew this was her chance. She took a step back towards the table with the gas lamp. I'm not sure I should," she said, feigning hesitation. The man took another step closer. "Give them to me," he said, his voice low and threatening. Helena waited until he was within reach. Then, with a sudden movement, she swung the wooden box, hitting the gas lamp with all her might. The lamp shattered, sending shards of glass and burning oil across the room. The room plunged into darkness. Helena screamed, a primal scream of fear and desperation. She turned and ran, blindly, towards the door. She heard shouts and curses behind her, the sound of furniture being overturned. She fumbled with the doorknob, her hands shaking. She pulled the door open and stumbled out into the hallway, into the darkness, leaving behind the chaos and the whispers of a bygone war. She felt along the wall, running blindly. Chapter 5. Threads of Silk and Sorrow. The hallway stretched before her, a black abyss punctuated only by the faint, distant glow of streetlights filtering through grimy windows at the far end. Helena ran, her lungs burning, her legs aching, the satchel containing the banner bumping against her side, a constant reminder of the danger she was in. She could hear the man and woman pursuing her, their shouts echoing through the deserted building. She had no idea where she was going, only that she had to get away, to find safety, to protect the secrets she now carried. The old building seemed to conspire against her, the floorboards creaking ominously beneath her feet, the shadows seeming to reach out and grab at her. She stumbled, nearly falling, catching herself on a broken doorframe. Her hand brushed against something rough and textured. She paused, her flashlight beam illuminating a faded, peeling section of wallpaper. It was a floral pattern, once elegant, now almost unrecognizable beneath layers of grime and decay. But there was something else. A small, almost imperceptible tear in the wallpaper, revealing a darker space behind it. Helena hesitated. It could be a dead end, a trap. But she had a feeling, an intuition, that this was more than just a tear in the wallpaper. It was a hidden door, a secret passage. She reached out, her fingers probing the edges of the tear. She found a small, metal latch, hidden beneath the peeling paper. She pressed it, and a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow, dark opening. Without hesitation, Helena slipped through the opening, pulling the hidden door shut behind her. She found herself in a narrow, dusty passage, barely wide enough for her to stand. The air was thick and stale, carrying the faint scent of mildew and decay. She switched on her flashlight, the beam illuminating the passage ahead. It stretched for several yards, then turned sharply to the left. She could hear the voices of her pursuers, closer now, searching the hallway she had just left. She moved quickly, silently, along the passage, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea where this passage led, but it was her only hope of escape. The passage twisted and turned, like a labyrinth, leading her deeper and deeper into the bowels of the building. She passed several other hidden doors, all closed, all silent. She wondered who had built these secret passages and why. What secrets had they hidden? What dangers had they escaped? Finally, the passage came to an end. Helena found herself facing another hidden door, this one slightly ajar. She could hear the faint sounds of traffic, the rumble of cars, and the clatter of horses' hooves. She pushed the door open and stepped out, blinking in the sudden brightness. She was in a narrow alleyway behind the Vanderlyn building. The street was just a few yards away, bustling with activity, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded within the crumbling walls. Helena leaned against the brick wall, her legs trembling, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was safe for now. But she knew she couldn't stay there. She had to get home, to examine the banner and the letters, to try to understand the secrets they held. She took a deep breath and stepped out of the alleyway into the crowded street. She blended into the throng of pedestrians, her heart still pounding, her mind racing. As she walked, she reached into her satchel and pulled out the banner. She unfolded it carefully, her fingers tracing the faded crest, the embroidered name of Captain Robert Douglas. The silk felt smooth and cool beneath her touch, a stark contrast to the rough, gritty fabric of the alleyway wall. She noticed something she hadn't seen before. A small, almost invisible stitch running along the edge of the banner, near the bottom. It was a different color thread, a darker shade of red, barely discernible against the faded background. Helena carefully examined the stitch. It was clearly deliberate, a repair of some kind. But it was also more than that. It was a hiding place. She gently pulled at the stitch, and the fabric separated, revealing a small, hidden pocket. Inside, nestled amongst the folds of the silk, was a small, folded piece of paper. Helena's heart skipped a beat. She carefully unfolded the paper, her hands trembling. It was a letter, written in the same elegant, flowing handwriting as the letters from Clara. But this letter was different. It was addressed, not to Clara, but to someone named Eleanor. The date at the top of the page read, November 10th, 1916. 5 days after Clara's last, desperate letter. Helena began to read. My dearest Eleanor, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means I am gone. I have failed in my mission, and I fear the consequences will be dire. The information I carry must not fall into the wrong hands. It is vital to the war effort, to the safety of our country. Helena's breath caught in her throat. This was not a love letter. It was a message, a warning, a confession. The letter continued, revealing a tale of espionage, betrayal, and sacrifice. Captain Robert Douglas was not just a soldier. He was a spy, working undercover to uncover a network of German agents operating in New York City. He had been betrayed, he wrote, by someone he trusted, someone close to him. He didn't name the traitor, but he hinted at a connection to Clara, to her family, to her circle of friends. He had hidden the vital information, he wrote, in a place where no one would think to look. He had entrusted it to Eleanor, his sister, the only person he could truly rely on. Helena's mind reeled. Captain Douglas had a sister, Eleanor, and he had entrusted her with a secret that was still hidden somewhere, waiting to be discovered. The letter ended with a plea. Find the truth, Eleanor. Expose the traitor. Avenge my death. Helena lowered the letter, her hands trembling. The weight of the past, the weight of Captain Douglas's sacrifice, pressed down on her. She now held a piece of that past, a piece of that sacrifice, in her hands. The threads of silk and sorrow were woven together, inextricably linked to her own life, to her own destiny. And the pull of the past became a push into the unknown present. Chapter 6. Letters from a Lost Generation. Back in the familiar sanctuary of her small apartment, Helena spread the contents of the wooden box and her satchel across her worn, oak dining table. The faded banner, now bearing the weight of its hidden message, lay alongside Clara's poignant letters and the newly discovered letter from Captain Douglas to his sister, Eleanor. The single, spent bullet, a stark reminder of the violence that had consumed Robert's life, sat nestled in a small, velvet-lined box she had found amongst her own belongings. The city outside her window hummed with a muted energy, a stark contrast to the quiet intensity of the room. The aroma of brewing chamomile tea, Helena's usual balm for frayed nerves, filled the air, mingling with the faint, musty scent of the aged paper and silk. She began with Clara's letters, rereading them with a new understanding, a new perspective. The words, once filled with simple longing and wartime anxieties, now resonated with a deeper, more ominous meaning. Clara's mentions of rumors, of whispers of danger, took on a new significance in light of Robert's secret life as a spy. Helena meticulously examined each letter, searching for clues, for hints of the betrayal that Robert had alluded to. She looked for names, for places, for anything that might connect Clara to the network of German agents. She found several recurring names. Mr. and Mrs. Vanderlyn, the original owners of the building where she had found the banner, a Mr. Schmidt, described as a business associate of Clara's father, and a Miss Abigail Thornton, a close friend of Clara's and a frequent visitor to the Vanderlyn household. Helena made notes in her leather-bound notebook, carefully recording each name, each detail, each potential connection. She was building a web, a network of relationships, trying to untangle the threads of the past. She then turned her attention to Robert's letter to Eleanor. It was a desperate plea, a final attempt to ensure that his mission was not in vain. He had entrusted Eleanor with the task of finding the truth, of exposing the traitor. But who was Eleanor? And where was she now? Helena reread the letter, searching for any clue to Eleanor's identity, to her whereabouts. She found only one, a mention of a family home in upstate New York, a place called Willow Creek. Willow Creek. The name resonated with a faint familiarity. Helena racked her brain, trying to place it. Had she heard it before? Seen it in some old document or map? She decided to consult her collection of historical maps and documents, accumulated over years of volunteering for the Historical Society. She spent hours poring over faded maps, dusty directories, and yellowed census records. Finally, she found it. A small village, nestled in the foothills of the Catskill Mountains, called Willow Creek. It was a remote, isolated community, far from the bustling streets of New York City. Could Eleanor still be there? Had she lived out her life in the family home, guarding the secret entrusted to her by her brother? Helena felt a surge of hope. She had a lead, a direction to follow. She had to go to Willow Creek. She had to find Eleanor, or her descendants, and uncover the truth about Captain Robert Douglas's betrayal. She knew it would be a long and difficult journey, both physically and emotionally. She was an older woman, not accustomed to travel or adventure. But she felt a sense of purpose, a sense of obligation, that drove her forward. She began to make plans, arranging for a leave of absence from her volunteer work, packing a small suitcase with essentials, and booking a train ticket to the nearest town to Willow Creek. As she prepared for her journey, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that the man and woman from the Vanderlyn building were still out there, still searching for the banner and the letters. She knew she had to be careful, to protect the secrets she now carried. She decided to take precautions, wrapping the banner and the letters in layers of protective cloth and hiding them in a secret compartment in her suitcase. She also decided to confide in someone she trusted, a fellow volunteer at the Historical Society named Arthur Davies. Arthur was a retired history professor, a knowledgeable and resourceful man who had always been a supportive friend to Helena. She told him the story of the banner, the letters, and her encounter in the Vanderlyn building, omitting, for safety, the espionage details. She asked for his help in researching Willow Creek and the Douglas family. Arthur was intrigued by the story, and he readily agreed to help. He promised to delve into the historical archives, to see what he could find about Willow Creek and its inhabitants. Helena felt a sense of relief, knowing that she was not alone in her quest. She had a partner, a confidant, someone who could help her navigate the treacherous waters of the past. As she boarded the train the next morning, she looked back at the city skyline, at the towering buildings and bustling streets. She was leaving behind the familiar comforts of her life, venturing into the unknown. But she was also embarking on a journey of discovery, a journey that promised to reveal the truth about a forgotten war, a betrayed soldier, and a love that had endured the test of time. All the threads would be revealed, she was certain. Chapter 7. The Society of Remembrance. The train rattled northward, leaving the concrete canyons of New York City behind and entering a landscape of rolling hills, verdant forests, and sleepy villages. Helena watched the scenery unfold, her mind lost in contemplation of the task ahead. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels on the tracks, the gentle swaying of the carriage, had a lulling effect, but her thoughts remained sharp, focused on Captain Douglas, Clara, and the mysterious Eleanor. She had received a telegram from Arthur, sent to the small hotel in the town nearest Willow Creek, where she had arranged to stay. He had uncovered some intriguing information. The Douglas family had indeed been prominent residents of Willow Creek for several generations. They had owned a large estate, known as Willow Creek Manor, and had been active in local affairs. But there was no mention of an Eleanor Douglas in the records Arthur had consulted. He had found references to Robert's parents, his two brothers, but no sister. This was puzzling, and it deepened the mystery surrounding Robert's letter. Had he used a false name to protect his sister's identity? Or was there another explanation? Arthur had also discovered something else. A small, local historical society existed in Willow Creek called the Society of Remembrance. They maintained a small museum and archive dedicated to preserving the history of the village and its surrounding area. Helena felt a surge of hope. The Society of Remembrance might hold the key to unlocking the secrets of the Douglas family. They might have records, documents, or even personal accounts that could shed light on Eleanor's identity and her role in Robert's mission. When the train finally arrived at her destination, Helena found herself in a quaint, picturesque town that seemed to have been untouched by the passage of time. Horse-drawn carriages still outnumbered automobiles, and the pace of life was noticeably slower, more deliberate, than in the bustling city she had left behind. She checked into her hotel, a charming, old-fashioned establishment with creaky floorboards and floral wallpaper. The room was small but comfortable, with a view overlooking the town square. After settling in, Helena set out to find the Society of Remembrance. She asked for directions at the hotel desk, and the friendly clerk pointed her towards a small, brick building just off the main street. The museum was housed in a former schoolhouse, a charming, two-story structure with a bell tower and large windows. Helena entered, finding herself in a quiet, dimly lit room filled with display cases, exhibits, and historical artifacts. A woman, perhaps in her late 60s, with silver hair and a kind smile, sat behind a desk near the entrance. She looked up as Helena approached. "Welcome to the Society of Remembrance," she said. "I'm Martha, the curator. How can I help you?" Helena introduced herself and explained that she was researching the Douglas family, particularly Captain Robert Douglas and his sister, Eleanor. Martha's smile faded slightly. "The Douglas family," she said, her voice tinged with a hint of sadness. "A tragic story. A lot of sorrow there." Helena's heart quickened. "You know about them?" "Of course," Martha replied. "The Douglas family were pillars of this community for generations. But the war, it took a heavy toll." "I found a letter," Helena said, "written by Captain Douglas to his sister, Eleanor. But I haven't been able to find any record of her." Martha's eyebrows rose. "Eleanor? That's unusual. I've never heard of a sister. Robert had two brothers, William and Thomas. Both serve in the war like Robert." Helena felt a flicker of disappointment. Was she on the wrong track? Was Eleanor a figment of Robert's imagination, a code name for someone else? "Could I see your records?" Helena asked. "Anything you have on the Douglas family?" Martha nodded. "Of course. Follow me." She led Helena to a small, back room filled with filing cabinets, bookshelves, and boxes overflowing with documents. "We have everything here," Martha said. "Family histories, letters, photographs, diaries, even some personal belongings." Helena spent the rest of the afternoon immersed in the archives of the Society of Remembrance. She pored over family trees, census records, and newspaper clippings. She examined photographs of the Douglas family, their faces staring out from the past, their eyes filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. She found numerous references to Robert and his brothers, to their service in the war, to their bravery and sacrifice. But there was still no mention of Eleanor. As the day wore on, Helena began to feel discouraged. She was starting to doubt her intuition, to question whether she was chasing a ghost. Just as she was about to give up, Martha returned with a small, wooden box. "I found this tucked away in one of the older files," she said. "It belonged to Robert's mother, Eliza Douglas. It contains some of her personal correspondence." Helena's heart skipped a beat. Could this be it? Could this box contain the answer she was looking for? She carefully opened the box, her hands trembling slightly. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a collection of letters. They were tied together with a faded ribbon, their edges brittle and brown. Helena recognized the handwriting on the top envelope. It was the same elegant, flowing script as the letters from Clara and the letter from Robert. But this letter was different. It was addressed to Eliza Douglas, Robert's mother. And it was signed, not Clara, but Eleanor. Helena's breath caught in her throat. She had found her, Eleanor. But she was not Robert's sister. She was Clara's sister, using a false name, with a hidden connection to Captain Robert Douglas. The web was getting more twisted. Chapter 8. A face in the faded photograph. The revelation hit Helena with the force of a physical blow. Eleanor was Clara's sister, not Robert's. The implications were staggering, rewriting the entire narrative she had constructed in her mind. Why the deception? Why the hidden correspondence? The questions multiplied, swirling around her like the dust motes she had encountered in the Van der Laan attic. Martha, sensing Helena's shock, offered her a glass of water and a chair. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Helena nodded, taking a sip of water, trying to calm her racing thoughts. I just need a moment," she said. She carefully untied the ribbon and lifted the top letter from the stack. The paper was thin and fragile, almost translucent. The date at the top of the page read, May 8th, 1915. A month before Clara's first letter to Robert. The letter began, "My dearest Eliza," Helena began to read. The words were filled with warmth and affection, revealing a close bond between Eleanor and Robert's mother. Eleanor wrote of her life in New York, of her social activities, of her family. But there was also an undercurrent of anxiety, a hint of something unspoken. She mentioned her sister, Clara, several times, expressing concern for her well-being. She wrote of Clara's growing attachment to Robert, of her fears that the war would tear them apart. As Helena read through the letters, a picture began to emerge of Eleanor. She was a complex, intelligent woman, caught between her loyalty to her sister and her own secret desires. She was clearly involved in something clandestine, something that required her to use a false name when corresponding with Robert's mother. The letters revealed a series of clandestine meetings, coded messages, and veiled references to the cause. Eleanor was working with Robert, assisting him in his espionage activities. She was his contact in New York, his link to the network of informants he was cultivating. But why the secrecy? Why couldn't she reveal her true identity to Robert's mother? The answer came in the final letter, dated November 1st, 1916. 4 days before Clara's last, desperate letter to Robert, and 9 days before his letter was written and hidden. Eleanor wrote of a growing danger, of a betrayal within their ranks. She suspected someone close to Clara, someone within her family's circle of friends, of being a German agent. She feared for Robert's safety and for her own. She revealed that she had discovered incriminating evidence, proof of the traitor's identity. She had hidden it, she wrote, in a place where no one would think to look, with Clara's letters to Robert. Helena's heart pounded in her chest. The missing piece of the puzzle. The information Robert had entrusted to Eleanor. It was hidden with Clara's letters, in the wooden box she had taken from the Van der Laan attic. But where exactly? She had examined the letters meticulously, and she hadn't found anything. She suddenly remembered something Martha had said earlier. "We have everything here, even some personal belongings." "Martha," she said, her voice urgent, "do you have any photographs of Clara? Any personal items that belong to her?" Martha looked surprised. "Yes, we do. We have a whole collection of photographs of the Douglas family and their friends. And we have a few of Clara's belongings. A locket, a diary, a few other trinkets. Could I see them?" Helena asked, her voice trembling with anticipation. Martha nodded and led her back to the display cases in the main room. She pointed to a case containing photographs of various individuals and families from Willow Creek's past. "There," she said, pointing to a faded, sepia-toned photograph. "That's Clara." Helena peered at the photograph. It showed a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, with dark hair, large eyes, and a delicate, almost ethereal beauty. She was wearing a long, flowing dress, and she had a gentle, wistful smile on her face. It was the face Helena had imagined, the face she had come to know through Clara's letters. But there was something else, something she hadn't noticed before. Around Clara's neck, hanging from a delicate gold chain, was a locket. It was heart-shaped, intricately engraved with a floral design. Helena's breath caught in her throat. She remembered something from Clara's letters. A mention of a locket, a gift from Robert, a token of their love. Could the locket be the hiding place? Could it contain the incriminating evidence that Eleanor had written about? It seemed almost too perfect, almost too obvious. But it was the only lead she had. She looked from the picture to Martha and back again, her voice tight. Chapter 9. Shadows Across the Harbor. Martha, Helena said, her voice a hushed whisper. The locket. Clara's locket. Do you have it here? Martha nodded, her eyes widening with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Yes, we do. It's in one of the storage boxes. I'll get it for you. She disappeared into the back room, returning a few moments later with a small, velvet-lined box. She opened it carefully, revealing a delicate, heart-shaped locket, identical to the one in the photograph. Helena reached out, her fingers trembling, and took the locket. It felt cold and heavy in her hand, a tangible link to the past, to the love and betrayal that had unfolded within the Douglas family. She examined the locket closely. It was intricately engraved with a floral design, just as she had seen in the photograph. She tried to open it, but it was firmly closed. There was no visible clasp or hinge. She turned the locket over, examining the back. There, almost imperceptible, was a tiny, almost invisible seam, running along the edge of the heart. With a surge of adrenaline, Helena used her fingernail to gently pry at the seam. The locket popped open, revealing a small, hidden compartment. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a tiny, folded piece of paper. Helena's heart pounded in her chest. This was it. The incriminating evidence. The secret that Eleanor had hidden, the secret that had cost Robert his life. She carefully unfolded the paper, her hands shaking. It was a small, handwritten note, the ink faded but still legible. The note contained a single name, Vanderlyn. Helena gasped. The Vanderlyns. The original owners of the building where she had found the banner, the building where she had encountered the man and woman searching for the letters. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, forming a chilling picture of betrayal and deception. The Vanderlyns were the traitors. They had been working with the German agents, providing them with information, sabotaging the war effort. But why? What was their motive? Helena remembered something Clara had written in one of her letters, a mention of her father's business dealings with Mr. Vanderlyn, of a partnership that had gone sour. Could it be that simple? A business dispute, a desire for revenge, had led the Vanderlyns to betray their country? She felt a wave of anger, of disgust, at the thought of such treachery. Robert Douglas, a brave and honorable man, had been sacrificed for their greed and ambition. She knew she had to do something. She had to expose the Vanderlyns, to bring them to justice. But how? The war was over. The Vanderlyns were probably dead, their crimes forgotten. She suddenly remembered the man and woman in the Vanderlyn building. They had been searching for the banner, for the letters. They had known about the secret. Could they be descendants of the Vanderlyns, trying to cover up their family's past? Trying to destroy the evidence that could still incriminate them? It was a long shot, but it was the only lead she had. She had to find them, to confront them, to find out what they knew. She decided to return to New York City. She had to go back to the Vanderlyn building, to the scene of her encounter, to see if she could find any trace of the man and woman. She thanked Martha for her help, promising to keep her informed of her progress. She packed her suitcase, carefully placing the locket and the note with the other documents. As she left Willow Creek, she looked back at the peaceful village, at the rolling hills and the verdant forests. She had come seeking answers, and she had found them. But the answers had brought her face to face with a darkness, a betrayal, that had cast a long shadow across the harbor of time. She had to find a way to resolve that darkness, to fight against the shadows. She was certain of it, standing there. Chapter 10. The Enlistment Office Beckons. The return journey to New York City was a blur of restless anticipation and growing apprehension. Helena clutched her satchel, the weight of the locket, the note, and the banner a constant, physical reminder of the dangerous secret she carried. The rhythmic clatter of the train wheels, once a soothing backdrop, now seemed to echo the frantic beating of her heart. She replayed the events in her mind, piecing together the fragments of information, trying to make sense of the tangled web of relationships and betrayals. The Van Derlens, the man and woman in the building, Clara, Eleanor, Robert, their lives, intertwined by love, duty, and treachery, were now pulling her into a vortex of intrigue she could scarcely comprehend. Upon arriving back in the city, Helena went straight to her apartment, not even pausing to unpack. She needed to talk to Arthur, to share her discoveries, to seek his advice. She called him from the telephone in her hallway, her voice trembling with urgency. "Arthur, it's Helena. I'm back. I found it. The evidence." It was in Clara's locket. She recounted her findings, the revelation about Eleanor, the Van Derlens' betrayal, the encounter in the attic. Arthur listened intently, his silence punctuated by occasional gasps of surprise and disbelief. "This is incredible, Helena," he said finally. "Absolutely incredible. But also incredibly dangerous. You need to be very careful." "I know," Helena replied. "I'm going back to the Van Derlen building. I need to find those people, the man and woman who were searching for the letters." "Helena, that's too risky," Arthur protested. "You don't know who they are, what they're capable of." "I have to, Arthur," Helena insisted. "It's the only lead I have. I have to find out what they know." Arthur sighed. "All right, but promise me you'll be careful. And promise me you'll call me the moment you find anything, or if you need help." "I promise," Helena said. She hung up the phone, her heart pounding. She knew Arthur was right. It was dangerous. But she couldn't back down now. She had come too far, invested too much, to turn back. She decided to wait until nightfall. The Van Derlen building was slated for demolition, and it was likely deserted during the day. But the man and woman had been there at night, searching the attic. Perhaps they would return. As darkness fell, Helena made her way back to the Lower East Side, to the crumbling building that held the secrets of the past. The streets were quieter now, the crowds thinned, the gas lamps casting long, flickering shadows. The building loomed before her, a dark, menacing silhouette against the night sky. The windows were boarded up, the entrance barricaded. But Helena remembered the hidden passage, the secret way she had escaped. She found the alleyway, the narrow, dark space behind the building. She located the hidden door, concealed behind the peeling wallpaper. She pressed the latch, and the door swung inward. She slipped inside, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The passage was just as she remembered it, narrow and dusty, filled with the scent of mildew and decay. She followed the passage, her footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust, her heart pounding in her chest. She reached the main hallway, the place where she had encountered the man and woman. The hallway was deserted, silent. The only sound was the creaking of the old building and the distant rumble of traffic. Helena moved cautiously, her flashlight beam sweeping across the walls, the floor, the overturned furniture. She was looking for any sign of the man and woman, any clue that might indicate their presence. She noticed something she hadn't seen before. A small, wooden desk tucked away in a corner of the hallway. It was covered in dust, but it looked relatively undisturbed. She approached the desk, her flashlight beam focused on the surface. There were several papers scattered across the top, yellowed and brittle. She picked one up, examining it closely. It was a legal document, bearing the name Van Derlen. It was a deed, transferring ownership of the building from the Van Derlen family to a holding company. Helena scanned the document, looking for any other names, any clues that might connect it to the man and woman. She found one, a signature at the bottom of the page, the signature of the new owner. The name was unfamiliar. Alistair Croft. Alistair Croft. Who was he? And what was his connection to the Van Derlens? Helena felt a surge of frustration. She had found another piece of the puzzle, but it only deepened the mystery. Suddenly, she heard a noise. A faint scraping sound coming from upstairs. She froze, listening intently. The sound came again, louder this time. It was definitely coming from the attic. The man and woman. They were back. Helena knew she had to be careful. She couldn't confront them directly. She had to observe them, to find out what they were looking for, what they knew. She slowly, silently, made her way back to the hidden passage, the secret way to the attic. She climbed the stairs, her heart pounding, her flashlight beam extinguished. She reached the attic, peering through the crack in the hidden door. The attic was dimly lit by a single lantern, casting flickering shadows across the rafters. The man and woman were there, searching through the trunks, the boxes, the piles of debris. They were talking in hushed tones, their words urgent and intense. Helena strained to hear, her ear pressed against the crack in the door. She now saw that the man and woman looked middle-aged, their clothes suggesting affluence. "That must be here. Somewhere," the man said. "The enlistment office." He said it was connected. The woman replied, "The enlistment office? What did that mean? What was the connection?" Helena's gaze swept around the room, and for the first time, she saw a poster partially obscured by a trunk. It looked to be promoting enlistment. Chapter 11. A Promise to a Dying Soldier. The mention of the enlistment office triggered a cascade of thoughts in Helena's mind. Robert Douglas had been a captain, a soldier. He had enlisted, gone through training, been deployed to France. The enlistment office, it was a place of beginnings, of commitments, of oaths taken. Could it hold another piece of the puzzle? She continued to observe the man and woman, their frantic search growing increasingly desperate. They were clearly looking for something specific, something they believed was hidden in the attic. That said it was hidden. Near the colors. The man muttered, his voice laced with frustration. The colors. The banner. Helena's hand instinctively went to her satchel, where the faded fabric lay carefully folded. They were still searching for the banner, even though they knew about the letters, or at least some letters. What else did the banner hold? What secret had she missed? She decided to take a closer look at the enlistment poster. It was old, faded, and partially torn, but she could still make out some of the words. It depicted a stern-faced Uncle Sam pointing directly at the viewer, with the caption, "I want you for U.S. Army." Below the image were details about enlistment requirements, locations of recruitment offices, and a patriotic call to duty. Helena examined the poster more closely, running her fingers over the surface. She noticed something odd. A small section of the poster, near the bottom, seemed to be slightly raised, as if something were hidden beneath it. She carefully peeled back the corner of the poster, revealing a small, folded piece of paper. Her heart skipped a beat. Could this be it? Another hidden message? Another clue? She unfolded the paper, her hands trembling. It was a short, handwritten note, the ink faded but still legible. The note read, "The truth lies where promises are made. Look for the name on the wall. He remembers." Helena's mind raced. Where promises are made. The enlistment office. The name on the wall. A list of recruits? A memorial plaque? He remembers. Who was he? She realized that the note was not referring to the attic itself, but to a physical enlistment office, a place where soldiers had signed up to fight in the war. It was a place Robert Douglas would have known, a place he might have used to hide something. But which enlistment office? There were dozens in New York City during the war. She suddenly remembered something from Robert's letter to Eleanor. He had mentioned working undercover, cultivating a network of informants. He would have needed a place to meet with those informants, a place that was both discreet and easily accessible. An enlistment office, a place bustling with activity, a place where people from all walks of life came and went, would have been the perfect cover. She decided to consult Arthur again. He was a retired history professor, and he might have knowledge of the various enlistment offices that existed in New York City during the war. He might also have access to records, to lists of recruits, to anything that might help her identify the specific office Robert had used. She carefully replaced the note behind the poster and slipped back through the hidden door, leaving the man and woman to their fruitless search. She made her way back to her apartment, her mind buzzing with possibilities. She called Arthur, her voice filled with excitement. "Arthur, I found something else. Another clue. It mentions an enlistment office. And a name on the wall." She recounted her discovery, the note hidden behind the poster, the cryptic message. Arthur listened intently, his interest piqued. "This is getting more and more intriguing, Helena," he said. "I'll do some research. I'll see what I can find about enlistment offices in New York City during the war. And I'll check the historical archives for any records of soldiers named Douglas." "Thank you, Arthur," Helena said. "I don't know what I would do without you." She hung up the phone, feeling a surge of hope. She was getting closer. She could feel it. The truth was within reach. The next morning, Arthur called her with news. He had found a reference to an enlistment office that had been located just a few blocks from the Vanderlyn building. It was a small, unassuming office, tucked away on a side street. And it had been used by a special unit of the Army, a unit involved in counterintelligence operations. Helena's heart pounded. It was the perfect place for Robert to have conducted his clandestine activities. Arthur had also found something else. A list of soldiers who had enlisted at that particular office. And on that list was the name, Robert Douglas. But there was another name on the list, a name that made Helena's blood run cold. A name that connected directly to the Vanderlyns. A name that revealed the identity of the traitor. The name was Thomas Croft. Thomas Croft, the brother of Alistair Croft, the man who now owned the Vanderlyn building. The man and woman in the attic. They were the descendants of the traitor, trying to cover up their family's past. And Thomas Croft, the record showed, had died during the war. He had been killed in action just a few weeks after Robert Douglas. But there was a discrepancy. The official record stated that Thomas Croft had died a hero, sacrificing himself to save his fellow soldiers. Helena knew that was a lie. Thomas Croft was a traitor, a spy who had betrayed his country. And Robert Douglas had known the truth. He had found the promise, and been killed because of it. The note wasn't about Robert finding something, it was about what he would find. Chapter 12. The Weight of Unsent Words. The revelation that Thomas Croft, Alistair Croft's brother, was the traitor, and his heroic death a fabricated lie, sent a chill down Helena's spine. The weight of the deception, the injustice of Robert Douglas's death, pressed down on her with a suffocating force. She had to expose the truth, to clear Robert's name, to bring the Crofts to justice, even if it was decades overdue. She decided to confront the Crofts directly. She had to know what they knew, what they were hiding, what their motives were. She arranged to meet Arthur at a coffee shop near the Vanderlyn building to discuss her plan. "Arthur, I'm going to talk to them," she said, her voice firm, determined. "I'm going to confront the Crofts." Arthur looked concerned. "Helena, I still think that's too dangerous. You don't know what they're capable of." "I have to, Arthur," Helena insisted. "I can't let them get away with this. I can't let Robert's sacrifice be in vain." Arthur sighed. "All right, but promise me you'll be careful. And promise me you won't go alone." "I promise," Helena said. "Will you come with me?" Arthur hesitated. I don't know, Helena. I'm not sure I'm cut out for this kind of thing." "Please, Arthur," Helena pleaded. "I need your support. I need your knowledge. I need your presence." Arthur looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of apprehension and admiration. He saw the determination in her face, the fire in her eyes. He knew he couldn't refuse her. "All right, Helena," he said. "I'll go with you." Helena felt a surge of relief, of gratitude. She was not alone. She had a partner, a friend, someone who would stand by her side. They decided to go to the Vanderlyn building that evening, hoping to find the Crofts there again. They knew it was a risk, but it was a risk they were willing to take. As darkness fell, Helena and Arthur made their way to the Lower East Side, to the crumbling building that held the secrets of the past. The streets were quiet, the gas lamps casting long, flickering shadows. They found the alleyway, the hidden door, the secret passage. They slipped inside, their hearts pounding, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They reached the main hallway, the place where Helena had encountered the Crofts before. The hallway was deserted, silent. They moved cautiously, their flashlights sweeping across the walls, the floor, the overturned furniture. They were looking for any sign of the Crofts, any clue that might indicate their presence. They heard a noise, a faint murmur of voices, coming from upstairs. From the attic. Helena and Arthur exchanged a look. The Crofts were there. They slowly, silently, made their way to the hidden passage that led to the attic. They climbed the stairs, their hearts pounding, their flashlights extinguished. They reached the attic, peering through the crack in the hidden door. The attic was dimly lit by a single lantern, casting flickering shadows across the rafters. The Crofts, Alistair and his sister, were there, searching through the trunks, the boxes, the piles of debris. They were talking in hushed tones, their words urgent and intense. Helena and Arthur watched them, listening intently. "That must be here. Somewhere," Alistair said, his voice laced with frustration. "At the unsent letters." He said they contained the proof. His sister replied, "The unsent letters." Helena's mind raced. What unsent letters? What proof? She suddenly remembered something. Clara's letters to Robert. She had read them all, examined them meticulously. But there had been one letter, the last letter, that was different. It was shorter than the others, more frantic. Clara had written of receiving a telegram from the War Department, informing her that Robert had been wounded. She had pleaded with him to write to her, to let her know that he was alive. But Robert had never written back. He had died before he could reply. Could that be it? The unsent letter? The letter that Robert never wrote? The letter that would have contained the truth about Thomas Croft's betrayal? Helena realized that the Crofts were not looking for evidence to destroy, but evidence to find. They were looking for proof of their brother's innocence, proof that he was not a traitor. They were looking for Robert's unsent letter. She knew she had to tell them. She had to reveal the truth, even if it meant shattering their illusions, even if it meant facing their anger, their disbelief. The hidden compartment, the truth. It was all she could do. Chapter 13. Rendezvous at the Grand Terminal. Helena took a deep breath, steeling herself for the confrontation. She pushed open the hidden door, stepping into the attic, Arthur close behind her. "Mr. and Miss Croft," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I need to talk to you." Alistair and his sister whirled around, startled, their faces a mixture of surprise and apprehension. They recognized Helena from their previous encounter. "You," Alistair said, his voice cold, menacing. "What are you doing here?" "I know about your brother," Helena said, ignoring his hostility. "I know about Thomas Croft." Alistair's eyes narrowed. "What do you know?" "I know he was a traitor," Helena said, her voice unwavering. "I know he was working with the German agents. I know he betrayed Robert Douglas." Alistair's sister gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Alistair's face hardened, his fists clenching. "That's a lie," he said, his voice low and threatening. "My brother was a hero. He died saving his fellow soldiers." "That's what the official records say," Helena replied. "But it's not the truth." Robert Douglas knew the truth. He was going to expose your brother. "You have no proof," Alistair scoffed. "I have this," Helena said, reaching into her satchel and pulling out the locket, the note, and the letters. She held them up, for the Crofts to see. "These are Clara's letters," she said. "And this is a letter from Robert to his sister, Eleanor, who was actually Clara's sister, working undercover with Robert." She explained how she had found the letters, the banner, the hidden messages. She told them about Eleanor, about her discovery of Thomas Croft's betrayal, about her hiding the incriminating evidence in Clara's locket. Alistair and his sister listened in stunned silence, their faces paling with each revelation. "The proof you're looking for," Helena continued, "the unsent letter. It doesn't exist. Robert died before he could write it. But he did leave this." She showed them the note from the enlistment office, the one speaking of promises, and a name on the wall. Alistair took the note, his hands trembling. He read it, his eyes widening in disbelief. "The enlistment office," he whispered. "The name on the wall." He suddenly understood. He knew what Robert had meant. He knew where to find the proof. "The Grand Terminal," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and dread. "The memorial plaque. It's there." Helena was surprised. You know about it? Alistair nodded. Our grandfather. He told us stories. About the war. About his son, Thomas. He always insisted that Thomas was innocent, that he had been framed. He said the truth was hidden. In plain sight. At the Grand Terminal. The Grand Terminal. The iconic train station in the heart of New York City. A place of comings and goings, of reunions and farewells, of hopes and dreams. A place where a memorial plaque honored the soldiers who had fought and died in the Great War. Helena realized that Robert had chosen the perfect hiding place. A place that was both public and anonymous. A place where no one would think to look for a secret. We need to go there, Helena said. We need to see the plaque. Alistair and his sister exchanged a look. They were still reeling from the shock of Helena's revelations, but they knew she was telling the truth. They knew they had to face the past, to confront the reality of their brother's betrayal. All right, Alistair said. Let's go. The four of them, Helena, Arthur, Alistair, and his sister left the Vanderlyn building, making their way to the Grand Terminal. The city streets were bustling with activity, the crowds oblivious to the drama that was unfolding. They arrived at the terminal, the grand hall filled with the echoing sounds of trains, announcements, and footsteps. They found the memorial plaque, a large, bronze plaque mounted on a wall near the main entrance. The plaque listed the names of hundreds of soldiers who had died in the war, their names engraved in alphabetical order. Helena, Arthur, and the Crofts scanned the list, their hearts pounding, their eyes searching for the name. Thomas Croft. They found it. And next to his name, almost imperceptible, was a small, almost invisible mark. A scratch, a gouge, a deliberate defacement. Alistair reached out, his finger tracing the mark. He felt a small, sharp object embedded in the metal. He carefully pried it out, holding it up to the light. It was a tiny, rolled-up piece of paper, secured with a sliver of metal. Alistair unfolded the paper, his hands shaking. It was a short, handwritten note, the ink faded but still legible. The note read, Thomas Croft, agent of the Imperial German government, betrayer of his country, witness, Robert Douglas. The truth. Revealed at last. Alistair's sister began to weep, softly, uncontrollably. Alistair stood there, stunned, his face pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of grief and shame. Helena placed a hand on his shoulder. I'm sorry, she said. I know this is difficult, but it's important that the truth be known. It was the end. Chapter 14. Secrets in the City of Lights. The weight of the revelation hung heavy in the air, the bustling sounds of Grand Central Terminal fading into a muffled backdrop. Alistair and his sister, whose name Helena learned was Beatrice, were devastated by the confirmation of their brother's treachery. The idealized image of their heroic uncle, carefully cultivated by their grandfather, had shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. Arthur, ever the historian, gently suggested they find a quieter place to talk. They settled in a small, relatively deserted waiting area, the plush velvet seats offering a strange contrast to the turmoil of emotions swirling within them. I don't understand, Beatrice said, her voice trembling. Why would he do it? Why would he betray his country?
Helena sighed.
We may never know the full answer, Beatrice. Greed, ideology, blackmail, there could be many reasons. Your grandfather's insistence on Thomas's innocence, it was likely a desperate attempt to protect the family name, to shield himself from the shame. Alistair, who had been silent, staring blankly at the tiny, incriminating note, finally spoke. My grandfather, he always said Thomas was framed by a jealous rival, another officer, who wanted his position. Robert Douglas, Helena said softly. He was the rival in a way, but he wasn't jealous. He was simply doing his duty, uncovering the truth.
What will happen now?
Beatrice asked, looking at Helena with pleading eyes. Will this become public? Helena hesitated. That's up to you, and your brother. The war is over. Thomas is dead. Bringing this to light now will only cause pain to your family. But Robert Douglas deserves to have his name cleared. His sacrifice deserves to be acknowledged. Arthur spoke up. Perhaps a compromise, he suggested. We could donate the evidence, the locket, the notes, the letters to the New York Historical Society. They could be kept in the archives, available for researchers, but not publicly displayed. We could also write a detailed account of the events, correcting the historical record, but without sensationalizing the story. Alastair and Beatrice considered this proposal. It offered a way to acknowledge the truth without exposing their family to public scandal. I think that's the best solution, Alastair said, his voice heavy with resignation. We can't undo what Thomas did, but we can at least ensure that Robert Douglas is remembered for his bravery, not his supposed jealousy. Helena felt a sense of relief. Justice, in a way, had been served. Robert's name would be cleared, his sacrifice recognized. The Crofts, while burdened with the truth of their family's past, would be spared public humiliation. They spent the next few hours discussing the details, arranging for the transfer of the evidence to the Historical Society, and drafting a preliminary account of the events. Arthur, with his historical expertise, would take the lead in writing the official narrative. As the evening drew to a close, Helena felt a profound sense of exhaustion, but also a sense of closure. She had started this journey with a simple discovery, a faded banner in a dusty attic. It had led her on a twisting, turning path, through the shadows of a bygone war, uncovering secrets, betrayals, and sacrifices. She had come to care deeply about Robert Douglas, Clara, and even Eleanor. Their lives, though lived decades ago, had touched her own, transforming her in ways she could never have imagined. Before they parted, Alastair turned to Helena. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere, "for finding the truth, for bringing closure to this painful chapter in our family's history." Beatrice echoed his gratitude, her eyes filled with tears. "You've given us a gift, Helena," she said. "The gift of truth, even if it's a bitter one." Helena smiled sadly. "It was Robert Douglas who gave the gift," she said. "He gave his life for it." She and Arthur left the Grand Terminal, stepping out into the cool night air. The city lights twinkled around them, a dazzling display of energy and vitality. But beneath the surface, Helena knew, lay hidden stories, secrets waiting to be uncovered, echoes of the past that continued to resonate in the present. She looked at Arthur, her friend, her confidant, her partner in this extraordinary journey. "What now, Arthur?" she asked. Arthur smiled. "Now, Helena," he said, "we go home. We rest. And we remember." They walked in silence for a while, the city's sounds washing over them. Helena felt a sense of peace, a sense of completion. She had fulfilled her promise to Robert Douglas, to Clara, to Eleanor. She had brought their story to light. She glanced toward a nearby bench. Chapter 15. The gathering storm of suspicion. On the bench, partially obscured by the shadows, sat a lone figure. Even from a distance, Helena recognized the distinctive silhouette, the broad shoulders, the dark suit. It was the man she had encountered in the Vanderlyn building, the man who had been searching for the letters with Alastair Croft's sister, Beatrice. Before Helena could react, before she could warn Arthur, the man stood up and started walking towards them, his pace deliberate, his gaze fixed on Helena. Arthur, noticing Helena's sudden stillness, followed her gaze. "Helena? What is it? Do you know that man?" Helena didn't answer. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the approaching figure. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear and apprehension. The man stopped a few feet away, his face partially illuminated by the glow of a nearby street lamp. He was older than she had initially thought, perhaps in his late 50s, with a stern, weathered face and piercing blue eyes. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "We meet again." Helena swallowed, trying to regain her composure.
Who are you?
She asked, though she already suspected the answer. "My name is irrelevant," the man replied. "What matters is that we have a mutual interest in the past." "I don't know what you're talking about," Helena said, trying to sound confident, but her voice trembled slightly. The man smiled, a cold, humorless smile. "Don't play coy, Mrs. Brooks. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The Vanderlyns, Thomas Croft, Robert Douglas, the letters." Arthur stepped forward, protectively. Sir, I don't know who you are, but I suggest you leave Mrs. Brooks alone. The man ignored Arthur, his gaze remaining fixed on Helena. You've been meddling in things that don't concern you, Mrs. Brooks. Stirring up old ghosts. Causing trouble. I was simply researching history, Helena said, her voice firmer now. Uncovering the truth. The truth? The man scoffed. The truth is dangerous, Mrs. Brooks. Especially when it involves powerful families, secrets that have been buried for decades. Are you threatening me? Helena asked, her eyes narrowing. The man didn't answer directly. I'm simply advising you, Mrs. Brooks, to be careful. To let sleeping dogs lie. To forget about the past. I can't do that, Helena said, her voice unwavering. I won't do that. Robert Douglas deserves justice. The truth deserves to be known. The man's eyes flickered with something that might have been admiration, or perhaps just amusement. You're a persistent woman, Mrs. Brooks. I'll give you that. But you're playing a dangerous game. He turned to leave, then paused, looking back at Helena. One more thing, Mrs. Brooks, he said. Don't trust anyone. Not even your friends. With that, he melted back into the shadows, disappearing into the bustling crowds of the Grand Terminal. Helena stood there, stunned, her heart pounding. Arthur put a comforting hand on her shoulder. Helena, are you all right? Who was that man? What did he mean? Helena shook her head, still trying to process what had just happened. I don't know, Arthur. I think he's connected to the Van der Lindens somehow. Maybe even another branch of the Croft family. He threatened you, Helena, Arthur said, his voice filled with concern. We need to go to the police. Helena hesitated. I don't know, Arthur. I don't have any proof. It's just my word against his. And he's right, powerful family's secrets, it could be dangerous to involve the police. But you can't just ignore this, Helena, Arthur insisted. He knows about the letters, about the evidence. He knows what you've discovered. He could be a threat to you, to me, to the Crofts. Helena knew Arthur was right. She couldn't just dismiss the man's warning. She had to be careful. She had to protect herself, and she had to protect the evidence. They decided to go back to Helena's apartment, to discuss their options, to figure out what to do next. As they walked, Helena couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the man's words were a harbinger of a gathering storm, a storm of suspicion and danger that was about to engulf them. The shadows were no longer confined to the past. They now stretched long fingers into the present. Chapter 16. Betrayal beneath the Brooklyn Bridge. Back in the relative safety of Helena's apartment, the tension remained thick, a palpable presence in the quiet room. The encounter with the mysterious man had shaken both Helena and Arthur, casting a long shadow over their earlier sense of accomplishment. We need to figure out who that man was, Arthur said, pacing the small living room. He clearly knows more than he let on. He's connected to the Van der Lindens somehow, but how? Helena, still reeling from the confrontation, sat down heavily at her dining table. He mentioned powerful families, secrets buried for decades. It suggests a deeper connection, a more extensive network than just the Crofts. They spent the next few hours going over everything they knew, trying to piece together the puzzle, to identify the mysterious man and his motives. They reviewed the documents, the letters, the notes, searching for any clue, any hint of a connection. Arthur, with his historical expertise, suggested researching the Van der Linde family tree, expanding their search beyond the immediate descendants of Thomas Croft. He also proposed looking into any known associates of the Van der Lindens, business partners, friends, or political connections. Helena, meanwhile, focused on the man's warning. Don't trust anyone, not even your friends. The words echoed in her mind, casting a chilling doubt over everyone she knew. Could it be a bluff, a tactic to sow discord and paranoia? Or was there a genuine threat, someone close to them who was secretly working against them? She thought of the Crofts, Alistair, and Beatrice. They had seemed genuinely shocked by the revelation of their brother's betrayal, but could they be playing a double game? Were they trying to protect their family name, even at the cost of the truth? She thought of Martha, the curator at the Society of Remembrance in Willow Creek. She had been helpful, providing access to the archives, but could she have a hidden agenda? Was she connected to the Van der Lindens in some way? She even thought of Arthur, her trusted friend, her confidant. Could he be hiding something? Could he be involved in this conspiracy? The thought was painful, almost unbearable. Arthur had been a steadfast ally, a source of support and encouragement throughout this journey. But the man's warning had planted a seed of doubt, a seed that was now growing, threatening to poison their friendship. She decided to test Arthur, to see if she could detect any sign of deception, any hint of a hidden agenda. "Arthur," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "You mentioned researching the Van der Linde family tree. Do you think you could do that discreetly, without alerting anyone to our investigation?" Arthur looked at her, his eyes filled with concern. "Of course, Helena. I understand your concern. But are you sure you're all right? You seem different." "I'm fine, Arthur," Helena said, forcing a smile. "Just a little shaken by what happened at the Grand Terminal." "That man, he was dangerous, Helena," Arthur said. "We need to be very careful." "I know, Arthur," Helena said. "That's why I want you to be discreet. I don't want anyone to know what we're doing." Arthur nodded. "I understand. I'll be careful. I'll start researching the Van der Lindens tomorrow. I'll go to the library, the archives, I'll see what I can find." Helena watched him, her eyes searching for any sign of deceit, any flicker of hesitation. But Arthur seemed genuine, his concern sincere. She felt a wave of guilt, of shame, for doubting him. But the man's warning had taken root, and she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was betraying them. The next day, Arthur left early to begin his research. Helena stayed at home, feeling restless and anxious. She tried to distract herself by reviewing the documents again, but her mind kept returning to the mysterious man, to his warning, to the growing sense of danger. Late in the afternoon, Arthur called. His voice was excited, urgent. "Helena, I found something. Something big.
You need to meet me. Now."
"What is it, Arthur?" Helena asked, her heart pounding. "What did you find?" "I can't tell you over the phone," Arthur said. "It's too sensitive. Meet me at the Brooklyn Bridge. The pedestrian walkway. In 1 hour. The Brooklyn Bridge. A public place, but also a place with hidden corners, shadowed spaces. A place where a betrayal could easily unfold." Helena hesitated. "Arthur, are you sure it's safe?" "Just come, Helena," Arthur said.
"Trust me."
The words echoed the mysterious man's warning. Don't trust anyone. But she had to go. She had to know what Arthur had found. She had to face her fears, to confront the growing suspicion that was threatening to consume her. She grabbed her satchel, containing the locket, the notes, and the letters, and left her apartment, heading towards the Brooklyn Bridge, towards a rendezvous that could either reveal the truth or lead to a devastating betrayal. The setting sun cast long, dark figures ahead of her. Chapter 17. The Cost of Loyalty and Love. The wind whipped around Helena as she walked onto the Brooklyn Bridge, the iconic structure a symphony of steel and stone against the darkening sky. The pedestrian walkway, usually bustling with tourists and locals, was relatively deserted at this hour, the chill wind and approaching twilight keeping most people away. She scanned the walkway, searching for Arthur. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of anticipation and dread. The man's warning, "Don't trust anyone," echoed in her mind, casting a shadow over everything. She spotted him near the center of the bridge, standing by the railing, looking out at the city skyline. He was alone. Helena approached him, her steps hesitant, her eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. "Arthur," she said, her voice a little shaky. "What is it? What did you find?" Arthur turned to her, his face pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of excitement and fear. He held up a small, folded piece of paper. "This," he said, his voice trembling. "I found this at the New York Public Library. It's a copy of a confidential report from the War Department, dated 1917. Helena took the paper, her hands shaking. She unfolded it, her eyes scanning the faded text. The report detailed an investigation into a network of German spies operating in New York City during the war. It mentioned the Van der Lindens, their connection to Thomas Croft, and their role in providing information to the enemy. But there was something else. something that made Helena's blood run cold. The report named another individual, an individual who had been working with the Van der Lens, an individual who had betrayed Robert Douglas. The name was Eleanor Thornton. Eleanor, Clara's sister, Robert's secret contact, the woman who had supposedly hidden the incriminating evidence. Helena gasped, staggering back. No, she whispered.
It can't be.
Eleanor, she was working with Robert. She was helping him. Arthur shook his head. That's what we thought, Helena. But this report, it's clear. Eleanor was a double agent. She was playing both sides. She was feeding information to the Germans while pretending to help Robert. Helena felt a wave of nausea, of dizziness. The world seemed to spin around her. The betrayal was almost too much to bear. Eleanor, the woman she had come to admire, the woman she had believed to be a victim of circumstance, was a traitor. She had betrayed Robert, betrayed Clara, betrayed her country.
But why?
Helena asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why would she do it?
Arthur sighed.
The report doesn't give a clear motive. It suggests she was motivated by money, by a desire for power, by a twisted ideology. But there's something else, Helena. Something the report doesn't mention.
What?
Helena asked, her eyes fixed on Arthur's face. I found another document, Arthur said. A letter, written by Eleanor to her parents. It was never sent. It was found among her belongings after her death. Her death? Helena asked, surprised. How did she die? She died in 1918, Arthur said. Shortly after Robert and Thomas Croft. The official cause of death was influenza. But this letter, it suggests something else. He handed Helena another piece of paper, a faded, handwritten letter. Helena took the letter, her hands trembling. She began to read. The letter was a confession, a desperate plea for forgiveness. Eleanor admitted her betrayal, her role in Robert's death. She wrote of her love for Thomas Croft, of her misguided belief that she could protect him by working with the Germans. She had been blinded by love, she wrote, consumed by a passion that had led her down a path of destruction. She had realized her mistake too late, after Robert had been killed, after Thomas had died. She had taken her own life, she wrote, unable to bear the guilt, the shame, the weight of her betrayal. Helena lowered the letter, tears streaming down her face. The cost of loyalty and love, twisted and distorted by war, had been devastating. Eleanor, Clara, Robert, Thomas, their lives had been destroyed by a web of deceit, a tragedy of epic proportions. Suddenly, a voice behind them broke the silence. A touching story, isn't it? Helena and Arthur whirled around. Standing a few feet away was the mysterious man from the Grand Terminal, his face now fully illuminated by the fading light. He was holding a gun, pointed directly at them. And standing beside him, with tears of her own, was Martha, from the Historical Society. Chapter 18. A glimmer of hope in the darkness. The sight of the gun, glinting ominously in the fading light, sent a jolt of pure terror through Helena. Beside her, Arthur gasped, his face paling even further. Martha, standing next to the man, looked distraught, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and regret. You, Helena said, her voice trembling, but still holding a note of defiance.
Who are you? What do you want?
The man smiled, a cold, cruel smile. I told you before, Mrs. Brooks. My name is irrelevant. But if you must know, I'm a protector of history, a guardian of secrets. And Martha? Helena asked, her gaze shifting to the older woman. What's your role in this? Martha avoided Helena's eyes, her voice barely a whisper.
I'm sorry, Helena.
I didn't have a choice. She's a descendant of the Van der Lens, the man explained. Her family has been protecting this secret for generations, trying to keep the truth buried.
But why?
Helena asked. The war is over. Thomas Croft is dead. What's the point of all this? The point, Mrs. Brooks, the man said, his voice hardening, is that some secrets are too dangerous to be revealed. Some truths are too damaging to be exposed. The Van der Linde name, their legacy, it must be protected. And what about Robert Douglas? Helena challenged him. His legacy? His sacrifice? Does that not matter? He was a casualty of war, Mrs. Brooks, the man said dismissively. A necessary sacrifice. Collateral damage. You're wrong, Helena said, her voice rising. He was a hero. He deserved better. And the truth deserves to be known. The man took a step closer, the gun still pointed at them. You're a foolish woman, Mrs. Brooks. You should have listened to me. You should have let sleeping dogs lie. I'm not afraid of you, Helena said, though her heart was pounding in her chest. I won't let you silence the truth. The man chuckled. Brave words, Mrs. Brooks. But futile. You have something I want. The evidence. The letters. The notes. Hand them over. Helena hesitated. She knew she was in a desperate situation. She was unarmed, facing a man with a gun, a man who was clearly willing to use it. But she couldn't give up. She couldn't betray Robert Douglas, Clara, Eleanor, all those who had suffered because of this secret. She looked at Arthur, her eyes pleading for help. Arthur, though terrified, met her gaze. He gave a slight nod, a silent signal of understanding. Helena took a deep breath. All right, she said, her voice steady. I'll give you what you want. She reached into her satchel, her hand closing around the locket, the notes, the letters. But instead of handing them over, she did something unexpected. With a sudden movement, she threw the contents of her satchel into the air, scattering the documents over the railing of the bridge, into the dark waters below. The man cried out in rage, firing the gun. The bullet whizzed past Helena's ear, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Arthur, taking advantage of the distraction, lunged at the man, tackling him to the ground. The two men struggled, grappling for control of the gun. Helena, though shaken, reacted quickly. She ran towards Martha, who stood frozen in shock. Martha, help us, she pleaded. Don't let him do this. Don't let him silence the truth. Martha looked at Helena, her eyes filled with tears. She hesitated for a moment, torn between her loyalty to her family and her conscience. Then, with a sudden surge of determination, she made her decision. She turned and ran towards the struggling men, grabbing the man's arm, trying to pull him off Arthur. The gun went off again, the bullet striking the steel structure of the bridge with a loud clang. The man, enraged, turned on Martha, shoving her away with brutal force. Martha stumbled, losing her balance, falling against the railing. The railing, weakened by age and corrosion, gave way. Martha screamed, falling over the edge, into the dark waters below. Helena cried out in horror, rushing to the railing, looking down at the swirling water. There was no sign of Martha. The man, seeing what had happened, stood up, his face pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of shock and fear. He looked at Helena, at Arthur, then back at the broken railing. He knew he was defeated. He knew he couldn't escape. He lowered the gun, dropping it to the ground. He raised his hands in surrender. Helena and Arthur stood there, stunned, their bodies trembling, their minds reeling from the events that had just unfolded. The glimmer of hope, the hope that the truth would prevail, had been almost extinguished by the darkness of betrayal and violence. But it was not completely gone. It still flickered, faintly, in the distance, like a distant lighthouse in a storm-tossed sea. The water below was turbulent. Chapter 19. The unveiling of truths unspoken. The wail of police sirens pierced the night, growing louder as they approached the Brooklyn Bridge. The events of the past hour had unfolded with a terrifying speed, leaving Helena and Arthur in a state of shock, grappling with the violence, the loss, and the lingering questions. The man, who finally identified himself as Samuel Croft, a distant relative of Thomas and Alistair, was taken into custody. He remained silent, his face a mask of defeat and despair. Martha's body was recovered from the river, a tragic victim of her family's long-held secret. Helena and Arthur were questioned extensively by the police, recounting the events that had led them to the bridge, the discovery of the evidence, the confrontation with Samuel Croft, and Martha's accidental death. The police were initially skeptical, dismissing their story as the ramblings of an overzealous amateur historian. But Helena's insistence, Arthur's corroboration, and the discovery of the scattered documents in the water, some of which had been salvaged by the police divers, began to lend credence to their account. The key piece of evidence was the note found at the Grand Terminal, the note written by Robert Douglas, identifying Thomas Croft as a German agent. The handwriting was confirmed to be Robert's, and the paper and ink were consistent with the period. The police also recovered the confidential report that Arthur had found at the library, the report that named Eleanor Thornton as a double agent. This document, along with Eleanor's confession letter, provided irrefutable proof of the conspiracy that had cost Robert Douglas his life. The news of the discovery sent shockwaves through the city, the story making headlines in all the major newspapers. The Vanderlyn family, once a prominent and respected name in New York society, was now exposed as a family of traitors, their legacy forever tainted by the actions of Thomas Croft and Eleanor Thornton. Alastair and Beatrice Croft, though initially devastated by the public revelation, cooperated fully with the police investigation. They had been unaware of Samuel Croft's existence, and they were horrified by his actions. They reiterated their commitment to honoring Robert Douglas's memory and ensuring that the truth was known. The New York Historical Society, with Arthur's guidance, organized a special exhibition dedicated to Robert Douglas, Clara, and Eleanor. The exhibition featured the recovered documents, the letters, the locket, and the faded banner, telling the story of their lives, their loves, and their betrayals. The exhibition became a sensation, attracting thousands of visitors, drawing attention to the forgotten sacrifices of the Great War and the enduring power of love and loyalty, even in the face of treachery. Helena, though still haunted by the events on the Brooklyn Bridge, felt a sense of closure, a sense of accomplishment. She had fulfilled her promise to Robert Douglas, to Clara, to Eleanor. She had brought their story to light, ensuring that their sacrifices would not be forgotten. She and Arthur remained close friends, their bond strengthened by the shared experience, the shared burden of the truth. They continued to volunteer at the Historical Society, dedicating their time to preserving the past, to uncovering the hidden stories, to ensuring that history was remembered accurately and honestly. One day, several months after the events on the bridge, Helena received a package in the mail. It was from Alastair and Beatrice Croft. Inside the package was a small, velvet-lined box. Helena opened the box, her heart pounding. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single object. It was the faded banner, the banner of Captain Robert Douglas, carefully restored, its colors still muted, but its crest and inscription now clearly visible. Attached to the banner was a note, written in Beatrice's elegant handwriting. "Dear Helena," the note read, "we wanted you to have this. It belongs with you. You brought it back to life. You gave it meaning. You told its story. Thank you." Helena held the banner, her eyes filling with tears. She had started this journey with a simple discovery, a faded piece of fabric in a dusty attic. It had led her on a twisting, turning path, through the shadows of a bygone war, uncovering secrets, betrayals, and sacrifices. She had found love, loss, and ultimately, truth. And she had found it not in the grand pronouncements of history books, but in the quiet whispers of unsent words, in the faded colors of a forgotten banner, in the enduring power of the human spirit. She held it gently and with reverence. Chapter 20. Dawn after the longest night. The restored banner hung in a place of honor in Helena's small apartment, a constant reminder of her journey, of the lives she had touched, of the secrets she had uncovered. The vibrant colors, though still bearing the mark of time, seemed to glow with a newfound life, a testament to the enduring power of truth and remembrance. Helena often found herself gazing at the banner, her thoughts drifting back to Robert Douglas, Clara, Eleanor, and the tragic web of love, loyalty, and betrayal that had entangled their lives. She had come to know them intimately, through their letters, their photographs, their hidden messages. She felt a profound connection to them, a kinship that transcended the boundaries of time and space. She had continued her volunteer work at the New York Historical Society, but her perspective had shifted. She was no longer simply cataloging documents, organizing exhibits, and preserving artifacts. She was searching for the human stories, the hidden narratives, the voices that had been silenced by history. She and Arthur remained close, their friendship deepened by the shared experience of the past few months. They often discussed the case, analyzing the events, reflecting on the motivations of the individuals involved, and pondering the larger lessons of the story. Arthur, with Helena's encouragement, had written a book about the case, a detailed account of the discovery of the banner, the investigation, the confrontation on the Brooklyn Bridge, and the unveiling of the truth. The book, titled The Faded Banner, a story of love, betrayal, and redemption in the Great War, became a critical and commercial success, drawing attention to the forgotten sacrifices of the war and the enduring power of the human spirit. Helena, though she had initially resisted the idea, eventually agreed to be interviewed for the book, sharing her personal experiences, her insights, and her reflections on the journey. She had come to realize that her story was an integral part of the larger narrative, a testament to the power of curiosity, perseverance, and the unwavering pursuit of truth. Alastair and Beatrice Croft, having come to terms with their family's past, had established a foundation in Robert Douglas's name, dedicated to supporting veterans and promoting historical research. They had also commissioned a memorial plaque to be placed at the Grand Terminal, next to the original plaque, correcting the historical record and honoring Robert's bravery and sacrifice. Helena had attended the unveiling of the new plaque, standing alongside Alastair and Beatrice, feeling a sense of closure, a sense of justice finally served. The ceremony was attended by historians, veterans, and members of the public, all drawn together by the enduring power of the story. As Helena looked back on her journey, she realized that it had been more than just a historical investigation. It had been a personal transformation, a journey of self-discovery. She had started as a quiet, unassuming woman, content with her solitary life, her routine, her familiar surroundings. But the discovery of the banner, the pull of the past, had awakened something within her, a sense of purpose, a sense of adventure, a sense of connection to something larger than herself. She had faced danger, confronted betrayal, and experienced loss. But she had also found friendship, courage, and a renewed appreciation for the fragility and resilience of the human spirit. The longest night, the night of secrets and shadows, had finally given way to dawn, a dawn of truth, understanding, and healing. Helena had emerged from the darkness, stronger, wiser, and more connected to the world around her. She looked at the banner, at the faded colors, at the embroidered crest, at the name of Captain Robert Douglas. She smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. The story was complete. The circle was closed. The past had been reconciled with the present, and the future, though uncertain, held the promise of hope, of remembrance, and of the enduring power of the human heart. The threads, once tangled, now lay in perfect harmony. Epilogue. Years passed. The city transformed, skyscrapers reaching higher, the roar of the jazz age replacing the somber echoes of war. But in Helena's quiet apartment, time seemed to stand still. The faded banner remained, a silent sentinel, a constant reminder of a story that had unfolded, a life that had been changed. Helena, now in her late 60s, had become a local legend, the woman who solved the Van der Linde mystery. She received letters from historians, researchers, and ordinary people, all captivated by the story of Robert Douglas, Clara, and Eleanor. She always responded, sharing her knowledge, her insights, and her unwavering belief in the importance of remembering the past. She continued her volunteer work at the Historical Society, mentoring younger volunteers, guiding them in their research, and instilling in them a passion for history and the human stories it held. Arthur remained her closest friend, their bond forged in the crucible of danger and discovery. They often met for tea, reminiscing about their adventure, discussing new historical discoveries, and enjoying the quiet companionship that had grown between them. Alastair and Beatrice Croft had become regular visitors, their initial shame and grief gradually replaced by a sense of acceptance and a determination to honor Robert Douglas's memory. They often brought flowers to place beneath the banner, a silent tribute to the man whose sacrifice had exposed their family's secret. One sunny afternoon, as Helena sat in her armchair, gazing at the banner, she heard a knock on the door. It was a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, with bright, inquisitive eyes and a determined expression. "Mrs. Brooks?" the young woman asked. "My name is Sarah Miller. I'm a history student at Columbia University. I'm writing a thesis on the Vanderlyn case, and I was hoping I could ask you a few questions." Helena smiled, welcoming the young woman into her apartment. She offered her tea, and they settled down to talk. Sarah was full of questions, eager to learn every detail of Helena's journey, every nuance of the story. Helena patiently answered her questions, sharing her memories, her insights, and her reflections. As they talked, Helena realized that the story of Robert Douglas, Clara, and Eleanor was not just a story of the past. It was a living story, a story that continued to resonate, to inspire, to teach. It was a story of love, loss, betrayal, and redemption. It was a story of courage, perseverance, and the unwavering pursuit of truth. It was a story of the human spirit, its capacity for both great darkness and great light. And it was a story that would continue to be told, passed down from generation to generation, a reminder of the importance of remembering the past, of learning from its lessons, and of cherishing the enduring power of the human heart. As Sarah left, promising to keep in touch, Helena felt a sense of peace, a sense of completion. The banner, bathed in the warm afternoon sunlight, seemed to glow with an inner light, a beacon of hope, a testament to the enduring power of truth and remembrance. The story had found its next chapter, its next voice. And Helena, the quiet, unassuming woman who had stumbled upon a faded banner in a dusty attic, had become a part of history herself, a link in the unbroken chain of human experience. The cycle was continuing and would continue to.